Since its introduction in 1984, Bumblebee has been one of the most popular Transformers characters. While his toy has always been popular, he has shown up on all kinds of merchandise. Plus, he is the only Transformer to now get his own self-titled movie. Join us as we explore this character from his inception to his latest incarnation on the big screen. I'm Captain Kyle, and I'm here to bring you the story of Bumblebee. Bumblebee's story, along with all the Transformers, starts at Hasbro. In 1984, Hasbro partnered with Japanese company Takara to bring the Diaclone and Microman lines over to the US and repurpose them into the Transformers. Now, Bumblebee is part of what is known as Series 1 of the G1 Transformer line. Now, his toy came from the Microman line, but his character, his charm, his very name came from the mind of Marvel Special Projects editor Bob Budiansky.
He's small, but I don't want him to sound weak. So what is small, and it could be yellow and black, and has a bit of a sting? Bumblebee. That's where Bumblebee came from.
Now, Hasbro's marketing of the Transformers went beyond the cool toys. They used a Marvel comic book and a cartoon series produced by Marvel Productions and Sunbow Productions to create a narrative that the kids loved. And one character they loved in particular was, of course, Bumblebee. This is the original G1 Bumblebee toy. And as you can see, he transforms into a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. Though when the toy was first released, they were actually using leftover Microman stock, which meant in addition to finding the yellow ones, you could also find red ones. Now, this was not the only toy to have that particular issue, because as you can see, we also have a yellow cliff jumper. Transformation is very simple. Pull out the wheels to form the arms, flip the back hatch open to show the face, pull the front of the car out, and turn up to create his feet. So one of the things that made Bumblebee very popular was, of course, his appearances in the comic book and the cartoon, though the way they depicted him actually doesn't match the toy very closely. His face actually has some kind of mouthguard cover, almost like a grill. Yet in the comic book and the cartoon, they decided to go with a more friendly, human-style face. There were some exceptions. The very first issue of the Transformers comic book did depict a very toy-accurate version of Bumblebee, and then some of the storybooks also showed the face just like the toy. Due to his small size, Bumblebee was mainly utilized as a messenger and a spy. He also idolized Optimus Prime. He would often take on some of the most dangerous missions, at least partially, to impress his hero. In the cartoon series, Bumblebee actually teamed up with Spike, a young human who was befriended by the Autobots very early in the series. In the comic book series, it was Buster Witwicky with whom he'd form a bond.
What interested me most about writing the Transformers was the idea that you have this very fish out of water situation. You have these giant mechanical life forms of immense power on our planet. Every time they encounter humans, there is some friction, there's some conflict, there's some misunderstanding, there's some learning curve. And so Bumblebee, at least initially when I started writing the book, he was the way to kind of bring these two worlds together. And that was a way for the readers also to sort of learn how to, through Buster, because Buster to me was like the representative of the readers. He was the human who was most relatable in the early issues of Transformers. He was the way for the readers to get an entry into this world of the Transformers. And so I needed to have that connection between a Transformer and a human, and that was Buster and Bumblebee.
Now, Bumblebee is considered one of the younger Autobots, though for a race that measures their lifespan in thousands of Vorns, and a Vorn is 83 Earth years, how young can he actually be? But his youthful attitude definitely made him relatable to young fans. Now, as I mentioned before, Bumblebee was one of the first series of Autobots, so he was part of the team that crash-landed on Earth 4 million years ago and was later on awakened by a volcano. Spike was definitely one of his more constant companions, and he had a tendency to get captured and demonstrate immense bravery. He even faced down Optimus Prime, who was temporarily evil due to a plot of Megatron. He was often a key figure in many of the early episodes. He was portrayed by voice actor Dan Gilvison, who wrote a book about his experience called Bumblebee and Me: Life as a G1 Transformer. It's a fascinating read for someone who wants a glimpse behind the curtain. In the comic, he also had a prominent role working with the human allies that the Autobots had found. Despite his small size, he was quite the thorn in the side of the Decepticons. In the 1986 Transformers movie, Bumblebee was present, but his role was actually kind of minor. He and his buddy Spike were stationed on one of Cybertron's 2 moons, which was devoured by the planet-eating menace, Unicron. By the end of the movie, he was rescued along with Spike and his 2 fellow Autobots, Jazz and Cliffjumper. And he would go on to have further appearances in the 3rd season of the cartoon. Now in the comics world, Bumblebee ran into G.I. Joe. Fans of other Hasbro properties might be familiar with that particular military organization. However, due to a misunderstanding, G.I. Joe blew up Bumblebee. But later on they figured out he was a good guy and they did rebuild him, though not exactly the same way. With a kind of new body and new look, he had a new name, Goldbug. In the Marvel UK continuity, they didn't have G.I. Joe. They had Action Force, but they didn't do the crossover, G.I. Joe versus the Transformers, where Bumblebee blew up, so they had to find a different way. So there was a character named Deathshead who actually showed up and blew up Bumblebee. Deathshead, whole nother story. Very interesting history on him. But again, Bumblebee was rebuilt into a new body and became Goldbug. So in the cartoon, there was a storyline, The Return of Optimus Prime. And if you're not sure why Optimus Prime needed to return, check out the story of Optimus Prime. Link at the end of this video. But during it, there was a hate plague which caused sentient beings to just go nuts and decide to beat the crap out of one another. Bumblebee, during one of the fights, got really badly damaged. Now Optimus Prime was being brought back with the help of a Quintesson. Long story, just watch the cartoon. But one of the things that Quintesson did was also rebuild Bumblebee into, guess who? Goldbug. It was an interesting scene when Optimus Prime returned and noticed Bumblebee looked different, and Bumblebee said, "I feel like a gold bug." Optimus Prime said, "Very well, you will now be known as Goldbug." There are some rather humorous parodies about whether or not Bumblebee actually wanted his name to be changed, but regardless, that's how Goldbug came about. Interesting fact about the name Goldbug. Now, it was Bob Budiansky who came up with the name of Bumblebee and the character, but before Bob was on the job, Denny O'Neil of Marvel actually took a stab at the characters and the names for the Transformers. Now, ultimately, his offerings were rejected by Hasbro, but do you know what his name originally was for Bumblebee? It was Goldbug. So here's the toy. A very simple transformation. He's actually one of the Throttlebots. Stands very stably. You can actually pull him back and watch him go. Now, the Throttlebots were a subgroup of Autobots who basically faced off against the Duocons, and they made Goldbug one of them. Now, the articulation of the original Bumblebee wasn't much to write home about. This one had even less. Basically, once he was transformed, he could stand there. You can't even move his arms. But this was indeed a new version of Bumblebee. Now, as Goldbug, he did show up in the 4th season of the cartoon, though calling it a season when it was only 3 episodes, it's kind of generous. But he didn't have a major role to play. It was all about headmasters and target masters. And after that, it would be quite some time before Bumblebee found his way back into an animated Transformers show. The comic book, however, did continue on his story as Goldbug teamed up with his fellow Throttlebots and the Autobot Blaster and kind of decided to leave the main Autobot group, which was led at the time by Grimlock. Yes, I said Grimlock. He was a little different in the comics. Eventually, he was instrumental in the restoration of Optimus Prime on the planet Nebulos. Yes, in the comics, Optimus Prime had to return as well. But he was badly damaged once again when Starscream gained incredible power during the Underbase saga. Again, some amazing stories during the Marvel Transformers run. You should check it out. Later on in the comic, the Autobot medic Ratchet was captured by Megatron. Megatron wanted Ratchet to restore the now defeated Starscream to health, hoping that he still had some of his incredible power. To do this, they were using these special Pretender shells. Now, Pretenders were a new type of Transformer that Hasbro came out with, which actually hid the robot inside an outer shell that looked like an organic being. Now, Megatron also had captured Goldbug, Grimlock, and Jazz, who were still wounded after the whole Underbase saga. Starscream was going to be repaired by use of a special Pretender shell. Luckily, there just happened to be 3 prototype shells just lying around. So while Ratchet did have to restore Starscream, he used those other 3 suits to bring back Grimlock, Jazz, and to bring Goldbug back, but reformatted him back into his old look as Bumblebee. Ratchet just didn't like the whole Goldbug look. Can you blame him? So this is the Pretender Bumblebee toy. Actually the largest version of the toy produced in the 80s, and the first one to actually have weapons. You could take off the helmet, open up the Pretender shell, take out the robot inside. The internal robot had both a robot mode and a vehicle mode. And you can see the size comparison. His internal robot as a vehicle is about the size of the Throttlebot. But he was taller, and he did have a bit more articulation. Though of course in his shell, he towered over his previous versions. Interestingly, when Hasbro released the Pretenders, they also released a series of Kmart exclusives called Transformers Legends. There were 4 of them: Jazz, Grimlock, Starscream, and Bumblebee, and they were carded Transformers. They were essentially the interior of the Pretender, just put on a card. What's really strange is when they packaged these, Bumblebee had Jazz's gun, and Jazz had Bumblebee's gun. But the only way to really tell if you have a Legend version or just a Pretender missing the shell is to get it on card. In Japan, where they actually called Bumblebee Bumble, they released a 4-pack of all the Legends versions. Now the comic book did continue on. I think at some point Bumblebee lost his shell, came out of his shell, something like that. But he didn't really have as much of a major impact, as really the comic book was designed to market the new toys, and that's what they were concentrating on, was the newer characters. But for the G1 line, there was still another version of Bumblebee to come out, though he was never actually featured exactly that way in the comics. This here is Action Master Bumblebee. Now, Action Masters were a line of Transformers that actually didn't transform. Their weapons did. Bumblebee has a helipack here that becomes a compressed air cannon called an Astral Exploder Rifle. The Action Masters looked a lot more like their cartoon versions. It's interesting to note that the Action Master and the Classic/Legend actually had a little bit more of a cartoon accurate face. Interestingly enough, in 2004 and later on in 2008 in Japan, Bumble was released in his original form, though he now had a cartoon accurate face. And the original G1 Bumblebee was released again, showing up as a Walmart exclusive in 2018. Again, the head was cartoon accurate, but they added some awesome paint details that really improved the look of the figure compared to the earlier Japanese version. So while that completes G1 for Bumblebee, his story is far from over. After G1, there was Generation 2. Hasbro decided to restart the line with Generation 2, and they did start a Generation 2 comic book in Marvel, though Bumblebee again didn't figure very prominently, but he did get a new toy. Now this particular toy is a chrome version. It's the same mold as the original Bumblebee, just with shiny chrome, and his face again is back to the original face mask weird grill thing. They even changed the Autobot symbol. But the G2 line started out with a bunch of G1s that were recolored, and then went on to some additional new toys for several years. Now while there was a G2 comic book, there was no actual G2 cartoon. What is often referred to as the G2 cartoon was G1 episodes released out of order with this weird space cube animation thrown on top of it. But another change to the whole Transformers line came about in 1991 when Hasbro acquired Tonka. Now, Tonka owned GoBots, which was the only competitor of note to the Transformers, though the Transformers pretty much won that battle. But once the acquisition was complete and Hasbro owned GoBots, well, they were going to take advantage of that as well. First, they released an Autobot by the name of GoBots, and then they released a line of Transformers known as Transformers GoBots. A lot of them were classic characters, though some new, that were made into Matchbox-style cars, just like this one, with very simple transformations and small guns. Bumblebee got the GoBot treatment in 1995, but instead of being a Volkswagen Bug, he's actually a concept race car. So after he came out as a GoBot, Bumblebee would not grace us again with his presence until 2001, when he would appear in comic books licensed by Dreamwave, and he wouldn't appear in toy form until 2003. But that part of the story will be in our next video. I really hope you enjoyed learning about this spunky, brave, and very yellow Transformer. He's yellow, but he's brave. If you'd like to show us some support, please consider donating via Ko-fi, link in the description. We will see you next time for more on the story of Bumblebee.
Hi, this is Gary Chalk of Optimus Prime. Please stay tuned to Fandom Spotlight. You can watch it online at any time.